There is no such thing as skin bleaching. That is so stupid. That's the most ridiculous, horrifying story I've ever heard. I'm a black American. I'm proud to be a black American. I am proud of my race. I am proud of who I am. I have a lot of pride in who I am and dignity.
He was the first star the entire world looked up to, and also the first to be consumed by the spotlight. Michael Jackson didn't just make music history. He was that history, written in moonwalks, in the anguished cries of Earth song, and in the silent death of a man who never truly got to live as a human being. From a child beaten backstage by his father to the king of pop, who sold over 1 billion records, from an angel in the public eye to a target relentlessly hunted by the media, Michael's life never had a place to breathe. He lived caught between absolute adoration and relentless suspicion. And the more he built Neverland to escape, the more he lost himself in his own dream. There are triumphs that make the whole world weep, and tragedies that render the planet silent. The name Michael Jackson doesn't fall between the two. It is their intersection, brilliant, then shattered. This isn't just the story of a superstar. It's the journey of a soul trapped between childhood wonder and the madness of fame, where the price of genius was nothing less than his very life. Our early life. Michael Joseph Jackson was born on August 29, 1958, in Gary, Indiana, a small industrial city where smokestacks loomed larger than childhood smiles and domestic violence was more common than laughter. The 8th of 9 children, Michael grew up in a cramped 4-bedroom house where poverty shared space with his father's shouting, and where the concept of childhood never truly existed. His father, Joseph Jackson, was a failed musician whose crushed dreams hardened into cold, ruthless control. Joseph ran the family like a business and his children like employees without a voice. Michael once said he was so afraid of his father that he would vomit when he entered the room. For Joseph, discipline wasn't about teaching. It was about belts and fists. A missed step or an off-key note could mean a blow or a beating. Michael was just 5 when he was pulled onto the stage. He didn't sing out of joy, but out of survival instinct. "I sang as if my life depended on it," he once said, and it did. The Jackson 5, a group Joseph formed, was not just the launch pad of a future legend, but also the place where Michael's sense of self began to vanish. At school, Michael was mocked for his nose, his skin, and his strange fame. At home, he was isolated as the golden goose. Every day felt like a performance, with no audience, only fear. While his brothers were sometimes allowed to loosen up, Michael, whose talent stood out too brightly, was kept on a tighter leash of rehearsals, shows, and money-making. Joseph saw in him a gold mine and mined him to the core. Behind the stage lights, where young Michael dazzled in sequins and a perfect smile, was a child who often cried alone in hotel bathrooms. He called it a nameless loneliness. After each performance, when the applause faded, there was no return to childhood because he had never had one. Only a return to cold walls and a tomorrow that looked exactly the same. No one ever questioned Michael Jackson's talent, but few truly understood. That brilliance came at a cost far too high, not paid in blood, but in the years when a child should be allowed to dream, to stumble, to be loved without conditions. The childhood ballads he later wrote were not just songs. They were the silent cries of a child still trying to find himself. On that little house on Jackson Street, a star was born, but at the same time, a piece of his soul slipped away. Forever. Early career. Michael stepped onto the stage before he even fully understood what the word audience meant. While his brothers were still trying to find their rhythm, the 5-year-old boy had already become the irreplaceable centerpiece of the Jackson 5, with a soaring voice, instinctive rhythm, and eyes that could silence a recording studio. His talent didn't need to be created. It only needed to be protected from being crushed by expectations. In 1968, the Jackson 5 signed with Motown Records and almost instantly became a national sensation. Their first single, I Want You Back, shot straight to #1, kicking off a streak of 4 consecutive Billboard-topping hits: ABC, The Love You Save, and I'll Be There. While the group was hailed as a miracle family, all eyes were on Michael, the youngest, yet the brightest. At age 11, Michael was touring across America, performing 2 shows a night, signing thousands of autographs, and smiling on cue for the cameras. But after each performance, he would often curl up alone in a hotel room, burying his face in a pillow to block out the voices calling his name. His companions weren't other children. They were managers, assistants, and suffocating schedules. He had no place to return to. Even within his own family group, Michael remained an isolated world. By the mid-1970s, as the Jackson 5's success began to wane and tensions grew with Motown over lack of creative control, Michael came to a quiet realization. To break free, he had to build his own path. But breaking away from family wasn't easy, especially for a teenager still under the control of a father who saw fame as personal property. In 1972, Michael released his first solo album, Got to Be There. When his tender ballad Ben, a love song to a pet rat, became a major hit, many laughed. A boy singing a love song to a rat? But they didn't understand. That rat was all Michael had, a silent creature, incapable of betrayal or judgment, a make-believe friend in place of the human world. The years from 1972 to 1978 marked Michael's adolescence lived between stage lights and shadows. He acted in The Wiz alongside Diana Ross, transitioned to Epic Records with his brothers, and began writing music, quietly, persistently, as if building a secret door to escape. While others saw a rising teen idol, Michael, still in his teens, was already grappling with questions of music, identity, and control. He didn't say it aloud, but in his diary, he once wrote, I know I'm different, not strange, just, I can't go back to who I was. Michael's solo career didn't begin with Thriller. It began with loneliness. It began backstage, watching his brother step into the spotlight first and wondering, will there ever be a day when I get to be myself? Just for me? Breakthrough and success. Success didn't come to Michael Jackson as a gift. It arrived like a storm, tearing through boundaries, breaking every standard, and leaving one man standing alone at the summit, unsure of who he truly was. In 1979, when Off the Wall was released, Michael finally found a piece of his own voice, no longer blended with his brothers, no longer under the shadow of Motown. The album sold over 20 million copies worldwide, featuring hits like Don't Stop, Till You Get Enough, and Rock With You. Yet when asked how he felt about that success, Michael replied simply, I was disappointed, because they still called me the best black artist, not the best artist. Though Off the Wall had paved the way for his solo career, Michael wasn't satisfied with success defined by race. He didn't want to be a successful black artist. He wanted to be the greatest artist. And with Thriller, he achieved that. But paid a price few would ever understand. Thriller wasn't just the best-selling album in history, over 66 million copies sold worldwide. It redefined what it meant to be a global superstar. With producer Quincy Jones, Michael shattered the lines between pop, R&B, rock, and funk. Singles like Billie Jean, Beat It, Human Nature, and Wanna Be Startin' Something. Each carved out their own sonic universe, pushed to the limits of emotion and production. The 13-minute Thriller music video wasn't just a clip. It was a cinematic revolution for music. MTV, which had previously avoided playing music by black artists, was forced to air it. Michael broke racial barriers on American television, placing black music at the very heart of pop culture. At the 1984 Grammy Awards, Michael took home 8 trophies in a single night, a record that still echoes today. But behind the sequined glove and red leather jacket was a man becoming increasingly detached from his own identity. After the impossible success of Thriller, it took Michael nearly 5 years to prepare Bad. He trained for hours each day, recorded hundreds of demo tracks, and personally oversaw everything, from the beat of the songs to the lighting of the stage. The result? Bad became the first album with 5 consecutive #1 hits. 1 singles on the Billboard, Hot 100, I Just Can't Stop Loving You Bad, The Way You Make Me Feel, Man in the Mirror, Dirty Diana. Michael emerged with a new rebellious persona, long hair, black clothing, sharper choreography. But his eyes had lost the innocence of Billie Jean. He was no longer the sweet-voiced young man. He was now the king of pop, and everything had to be perfect, down to the heartbeat. The Bad Tour spanned 16 months, drew over 4.4 million fans across 15 countries, a record at the time. Yet backstage, Michael often fell asleep in cars, avoided people, and increasingly relied on sleeping aids to stay on rhythm. No longer collaborating with Quincy Jones, Michael experimented with new jack swing, industrial pop, and world music on Dangerous. The album revealed his angel warrior duality, tender on Heal the World, defiant in Black or White, Jam, and Give In to Me. The Black or White video broke global viewership records. Remember the Time was a visual celebration of African beauty. Yet during this era, Michael's rapidly changing appearance drew growing controversy, raising questions about race, vitiligo, and his mental stability. The Dangerous World Tour drew over 3.5 million fans and raised funds for children through the Heal the World Foundation, but the exhaustion was becoming visible on his face. After the 1993 allegations, to be covered later, Michael returned with History, Past, Present, and Future, Book 1, half a greatest hits compilation, half a collection of raw, defiant, deeply personal new tracks. They Don't Care About Us, Stranger in Moscow, Earth Song, Childhood. These weren't easy songs. They weren't made to be loved. They were confessions from a soul under siege by the media, insomnia, doubt, and a desperate longing to truly live. At the same time, he launched the History World Tour, 82 shows, 4.5 million fans, and his final international tour. Michael Jackson redefined the modern solo artist. He wasn't just a singer, he was a dancer, producer, philanthropist, video director, fashion icon, and above all, the voice of the lonely, the wounded children, and the souls never allowed to be fully themselves. But just as the world looked up to him, Michael began to look down, at the shadow that had grown larger than the man behind the spotlight. Turmoil and shadows. Michael Jackson didn't destroy himself. The world did it for him. He just no longer had the strength to fight back. After the peak of Dangerous and History, Michael entered an era no longer defined by music, but by scandal, suspicion, and judgmental stares. The same forces that once crowned him king of pop now turned on him, dissecting every gesture, every change in his appearance, turning them into mockery. It all began in 1993. At the height of his career, while the Dangerous World Tour was selling out arenas across the globe, Michael was accused of child sexual abuse by a boy named Jordan Chandler. The biggest star in the world instantly became the target of a media onslaught. His home was raided by police, searched from bedroom to bathroom. He was forced to undergo a full-body photograph session to compare with testimony, an act he later described as destroying his sense of dignity. Under intense legal pressure and seeking to avoid prolonged suffering, Michael agreed to a civil settlement with the boy's family for a staggering $23 million. But the true cost wasn't financial. It was his reputation. The world no longer saw him as the angel of Heal the World, but as an eccentric cloaked in a pop crown. After the lawsuit, Michael spiraled into deep depression. He canceled the rest of the tour, lost significant weight, and began relying on sedatives. But he wasn't allowed to collapse. When he returned with History in 1995, he was no longer singing about love or peace. He was angry, wounded, defiant, from Scream to They Don't Care About Us. It was no longer music, it was a cry for help. Then in 2002, controversy erupted again, when Michael dangled his infant son, Blanket, over a hotel balcony in Berlin in front of flashing cameras. The moment lasted only seconds, but it spread globally, becoming a symbol of a crazy, careless, and out-of-touch father. Though Michael quickly apologized and admitted it was a foolish mistake, the damage to his image was irreversible. And then came 2005, his darkest chapter. He was indicted on 14 criminal charges, including molestation and providing alcohol to minors. He stood trial for 4 months. He appeared frail, trembling, frequently hospitalized. The press dug into every corner of his life: his pet chimpanzee Bubbles, his habit of talking to mannequins, sleeping with children at Neverland, and speaking in a childlike voice. Though he was fully acquitted of all charges, Michael was never the same again. He withdrew from the public eye, shut down Neverland, canceled deals, and lived like a man sentenced not by law, but by society itself. Over 2 decades, Michael slowly transformed into a strange figure even he could no longer control. His skin turned from brown to white, a result of vitiligo, later confirmed by medical reports. But no one cared. They claimed he bleached himself, had so many nose surgeries that it collapsed, even wore a prosthetic. His visits to dermatologists, oxygen therapy, and burn treatment were twisted into bizarre headlines. Michael sleeps in a hyperbaric chamber to stay young forever. One tabloid even claimed he bought the bones of Joseph Merrick, the Elephant Man, because he felt a kinship. No one cared about the truth. They only wanted something freakish to talk about. Michael's mental state became increasingly unstable. In his private journals, he compared himself to Peter Pan, Napoleon, and the Elephant Man, figures who lived on the fringes, misunderstood, or trapped in bodies that didn't belong to them. He lost his sense of identity, unsure if he was a child or an adult, an icon or a victim, an artist or a product of the entertainment machine. His children, Prince, Paris, and Blanket, were born via surrogates, which sparked relentless rumors about their parentage. Though Michael loved them fiercely and proudly called himself their father, the public kept whispering, "Is he really their biological dad?" Never had a man been so deeply loved, and yet so deeply doubted. Beyond scandal, Michael faced financial disaster. He spent extravagantly, millions on paintings, statues, exotic animals, costumes, antiques. He mortgaged Neverland, then sold much of his music catalog, including the Beatles' masters he once owned. From being one of the highest-paid entertainers of the 1980s, he fell into hundreds of millions in debt, eventually forced to launch the This Is It concerts, a final gamble to save it all. And through all of it, the deepest wound wasn't the accusations, the mockery, or the money lost. It was the sense that no one believed he was human anymore. He once wrote in his notebook, "I'm a freak in their eyes, but in mine, I'm just someone who never got to grow up." Personal life. For a man constantly surrounded by crowds, the cruel truth was that Michael Jackson was almost always alone. His relationships, romantic, platonic, familial, and paternal, were all distorted by fame, rumors, and a deep fear of being hurt. Michael was rumored to have had romances with a string of celebrities, from Brooke Shields to Diana Ross, from Elizabeth Taylor to Madonna, but the only relationship he publicly confirmed was with Lisa Marie Presley, the only daughter of Elvis Presley. Their 1994 marriage stunned the world, a union between the king of pop and the princess of rock. To many, it seemed like a bizarre alliance, even dismissed as a publicity stunt to repair his image after child abuse allegations. But in letters and later interviews, Lisa Marie admitted they genuinely loved each other, but couldn't heal the wounds inside each other. Michael became increasingly withdrawn, suffered from insomnia, relied on medication, and wouldn't let her into the most hidden parts of himself. The marriage lasted a little over a year before dissolving in silence and emotional fatigue. Not long after, Michael married Debbie Rowe, a white nurse who had worked at dermatologist Dr. Arnie Klein's clinic. Debbie gave birth to two of his children, Prince Michael V and Paris Michael Catherine. Their marriage was equally controversial. No public ceremony, no long-term cohabitation, and Debbie later relinquished full custody to Michael. To many, she was merely a legal surrogate. But according to her, Michael really wanted to be a father. I just helped make that happen. In 2002, Michael welcomed his third child, Blanket, later renamed Biggie, born via an anonymous surrogate. All three children were raised under intense protection. Michael loved them with desperate devotion, perhaps because he had never been loved properly as a child himself. He covered their faces in public, homeschooled them, and spent most of his time playing, storytelling, and singing them to sleep. But that extreme protection only fueled public suspicion about the true identity of his children. Rumors swirled that Michael couldn't be their biological father. He never responded. He simply kept them close, as if they were the last part of himself he could still protect. Behind these family relationships was a man filled with contradictions. He loved his mother, Katherine Jackson, deeply, once calling her the only angel in my life. But with his father, Joseph Jackson, he harbored a mix of fear, anger, and pain. Though Joseph had introduced the Jackson 5 to the world, he was also, in Michael's words, the man who stole my childhood with a leather strap and a cold stare. In terms of friendships, Michael was close to a few: Elizabeth Taylor, Macaulay Culkin, Chris Tucker, among them. But most of the time, he lived in isolation at Neverland, a fairy tale kingdom he built to fill the void of a stolen childhood. There, he raised animals, collected dolls, watched cartoons, and invited children over as kindred spirits. Many didn't understand. Some were frightened. And that loneliness slowly led him to rely more heavily on sedatives as a way to sleep, to forget, to escape the echo of the name the media gave him. Wacko Jacko. Michael once said, "I never got to live my age. I'm the real child, and this world has no room for grown-up children." His personal life, in the end, was a never-ending search for understanding in a world that never stopped judging. Final years and legacy. By the late 2000s, after nearly a decade of reclusion, Michael Jackson was preparing for a comeback. The public called it the resurrection of the King of Pop, and it was. It wasn't just the name of his highly anticipated concert series in London. It was also his final message to the world. If there's still something left to say, I'll sing it. Michael originally signed on for 10 shows, but tickets sold out in hours, prompting organizers to expand the run to an astonishing 50 consecutive nights, an insane number for a man who was visibly frail and carrying years of physical injuries. Yet Jackson returned to the rehearsal room, practicing choreography down to each beat, reviewing every detail of the production, from lights to props. He was physically weak, but mentally very clear, recalled Kenny Ortega, the show's director. Michael knew exactly what he wanted, and he never stopped being the most exacting artist I've ever known. But behind the scenes, everything was unraveling. Michael suffered from chronic insomnia. He feared he wouldn't be able to sing live for 50 shows, and even more so, feared collapsing on stage. The trauma from his 2005 trial, relentless media pressure, and fear of failure left him sleeping only a few hours a night, relying on one thing: propofol, a surgical anesthetic. Dr. Conrad Murray, hired as Michael's personal physician, administered the drug nightly to help him sleep. Then, on the morning of June 25, 2009, Michael Jackson never woke up. News of his death spread like a global earthquake. King of Pop is dead dominated the front pages of every major newspaper. His daughter Paris, in tears on live television, said, "Ever since I was born, Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine. And now, I don't know how to live without him." Over 1 billion people watched his memorial service on television. For the first time, the world fell silent, not because of scandal, but because of loss. When word of Michael Jackson's death broke on the afternoon of June 25, 2009, the world seemed to stop. Crowds gathered outside UCLA Medical Center, the gates of Neverland, Sony headquarters, even the White House. News tickers across all channels repeated one line: "The King of Pop is dead." But this wasn't just the death of a celebrity. It was the end of an era and the beginning of a flood of unresolved questions. According to the coroner's report, Michael died of cardiac arrest caused by acute propofol intoxication, a potent anesthetic meant only for surgical use. The only person with him at the time was Dr. Conrad Murray, paid $150,000 per month to oversee Jackson's health in preparation for This Is It. But Murray wasn't an anesthesiologist. He had no heart monitor, no resuscitation equipment, and worst of all, he left the room while Michael was under sedation. When he returned, Jackson was no longer breathing. Instead of calling 911 immediately, Murray attempted to revive him himself, wasting crucial minutes. The criminal investigation revealed the dark truth behind the scenes. Michael's insomnia was so severe that he couldn't sleep even an hour without anesthesia. He depended on a cocktail of medications: lorazepam, diazepam, midazolam, and propofol. none of which were ever intended for home use, and Murray had provided all of it, nightly, for nearly 2 months. In November 2011, Conrad Murray was sentenced to 4 years in prison for involuntary manslaughter, becoming the first physician in U.S. history convicted over the death of a celebrity. But many saw him as a scapegoat. Questions arose about AEG Live, the concert promoter that had hired Murray and allegedly pressured Jackson to perform despite his visible exhaustion. The Jackson family sued AEG for over $1 billion, claiming they had driven him to the edge. The case dragged on for years, but AEG was cleared of liability. Some believe Michael wanted to go. In his final months, he wrote chilling notes. "I'm scared. I can't sleep. I feel like I'm dying." His recovered journals revealed paranoia. He felt watched, feared being murdered over financial disputes. Rumors claimed he called a lawyer the night before his death to amend his will. But it all ended too suddenly. In death, Michael left behind a financial mess. He owed over $500 million, mortgages on Neverland, unpaid taxes, and legal fees from his 2005 trial. Ironically, death saved him from bankruptcy. The This Is It album was released. The behind-the-scenes film grossed over $260 million, and his music catalog surged in popularity. As of 2024, Michael Jackson has remained the highest-earning deceased artist for 11 consecutive years. His estate, entrusted to his mother Catherine and his 3 children, and managed by John Branca and John McClain, rebounded quickly, exceeding $2 billion in value. But it also sparked family infighting, particularly between Michael's siblings and his financial executors. He left behind over 750 million records sold, 13 Grammy Awards, dozens of Guinness World Records, and became the first artist to have 5 of the best-selling albums of all time. Thriller remains the highest-selling album in history, not just for numbers, but for breaking racial barriers and redefining global pop. He revolutionized the way artists engaged with the public through MTV, music videos, stage fashion, and by making dance central to popular performance. Moves like the moonwalk, anti-gravity lean, or the black and white choreography of Black or White weren't just iconic. They were a non-verbal language that transcended borders. Michael Jackson was also the first to turn music into a healing force and a platform for speaking out. Heal the World, Man in the Mirror, Earth Song. They became unofficial anthems for peace, the environment, and compassion. Though he never labeled himself an activist, he donated over $300 million to children's and health charities. Despite the controversies, Neverland once welcomed terminally ill children, offering them a few precious days of joy. Even after his death, Michael continues to influence pop music. From Beyoncé, Usher, Justin Timberlake, and Chris Brown to The Weeknd, nearly every major pop artist bears his imprint. They learned how he fused soul, funk, rock, and R&B, how he turned concerts into cultural events, and most importantly, how he used music as a weapon against apathy. Michael Jackson was a symbol, but he was also a man. He broke down, was hated, misunderstood, and vilified. And that's why his story isn't about perfection. It's about survival. He wasn't a fallen angel, nor the monster the tabloids made him out to be. He was just a child who never had the chance to grow up, but still tried to sing his heart out for the entire world to hear. Michael Jackson never truly got to live as an ordinary human being. From the age of 5, the world called him a star. But behind the spotlight was a child afraid of his father, afraid of making mistakes, afraid of being abandoned. The more famous he became, the lonelier he felt. The more he was adored, the more he had to hide. People saw him dance, but no one saw him tremble. They heard his voice, but no one heard the cries inside him. Michael lived in a world of his own creation. Neverland, but it wasn't a playground. It was a refuge for a soul that had never been healed. He tried to build the ideal persona, a devoted father, a genderless performer, an angel walking among us. But that very perfection devoured the real man underneath. In the end, no one could tell where Michael ended and where Jackson began. His career was a declaration of genius, but his life was an indictment of the entertainment industry, a place that could turn a child into a legend, and just as easily tear him apart, piece by piece, in front of millions. Michael Jackson didn't die from an injection. He died from being seen too much, understood too little, and loved far too late. And what about you? When you think of Michael Jackson, what comes to mind first? The moonwalks, the scandals, or the notes that once made your heart ache? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Rock Discovery to continue exploring the lives that burned brightly and left an indelible mark on music history.